In this video, we'll take a look at how to manage our OTLs in Houdini using the operator type manager. The operator type manager is a tool in Houdini that allows you to do things like copying OTLs, adding or removing them from your HIP file, searching to see which OTLs are actually in your HIP file, and a few other things that we will take a look at. So there are two different ways to get to the operator type manager. The first is to go down to the Windows menu, and then just find operator type manager right there. And the second way, if I just close this down, is to right click on any OTL and go to operator type manager right here. And if you notice, the difference between the two is that if I go to operator type manager from the right click menu on an OTL, it'll automatically highlight it in here. So that way I can see it right away. In this pane, it'll actually show us all the OTLs that we have loaded into the HIP file currently. Under our current HIP file here, it shows us all the OTLs that we installed manually, and you'll notice that this is all the OTLs that I created on my own. So that's our control matrix, our control point, and our protocol controller. And then down here we have scanned OTL directories. And those are OTLs that Houdini picked up by following its internal paths. Now certain companies will set up some of the environment variables in Houdini to automatically pick up OTLs in other directories. So you might see things other than Houdini OTLs in here. But for the most part, you'll just see Houdini OTLs in here, especially if you're at home. So if we just close that real fast, let's take a look at some of the cool things that we can do with the operator type manager. The first thing that we can do is we can copy OTLs. So say I wanted to take this control matrix and I wanted to have the exact same OTL, but I wanted to make it in a separate OTL file, and I wanted to call it something different. So essentially I want to branch it off into something else that's similar but does something else. Or maybe it's just another version or something. So the way that we do this is we highlight the OTL itself, and notice that the part here that says that it's a path to the OTL file on disk is expanded, and I'm grabbing this thing that says sop/control matrix. So this is like the OTL itself, and this is essentially the OTL file, and we can do different things with this. But if we want to copy the OTL, we need to grab the OTL itself. So if we select that, and then we right click and say copy, you may recognize this as being suspiciously similar to the dialog that we saw when we created OTLs in the first place. Then we would call it something else. Let's say control matrix underscore v02. I'm just going to put another underscore at the end so that when we put down the OTL, it'll have an underscore there before it puts on the number. So the first one I drop down will be control matrix v02 underscore 1, and so on. And then I'll just put v02 also. We can put that into the label. And then let's save it somewhere that makes sense, so not here. So go to my OTLs directory and just call it control matrix v02 underscore .otl. I just copied and pasted this guy into here. And then we hit accept. And then if we hit accept again, you'll notice that suddenly we have this extra line here. And we have a path to control matrix v02 underscore .otl in our current HIP file section. And if we expand that, we can see that there's another OTL there. So now if I close the operator type manager, we can take a look. So we can say, so we hit tab and we type control matrix, you can see that suddenly there's a second OTL there. And it's exactly the same as the other one. So now these have been branched off and we can modify this one on its own. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the other things that we can do from the operator type manager. So if we right click on our control matrix v02 node and we go back to operator type manager, notice that it selected the node itself. So let's take a look at removing OTLs from our HIP file. So if we select the OTL file itself and we right click, you can see that we had a whole bunch of options here. Now most of these are related to how it displays it in the tree here, and these are what to do with the actual file, and what I want to look at here is uninstall. Now, if we actually just uninstall this, Houdini's going to freak out a little bit, and it'll freak out in an interesting way that we'll take a look at later. But the reason why it'll freak out is because we have an instance of that OTL put down in our HIP file, but we're telling it to remove the OTL definition from our HIP file. So basically it's going to say, okay, well I want to remove this definition from the HIP file, but then I have it here, so I can't just remove it. So then it'll do something interesting, which we'll take a look at in just a moment. For now, let's just go ahead and delete this OTL instance, and make sure that there are no other instances of that OTL in your scene. So now if we grab that and we right click and say uninstall, it asks me if I'm sure, and yes, I'm sure. And now it's just gone. And now if we put our cursor in the network editor, and we hit tab, and we type control matrix, notice that control matrix VO2 is completely gone now. Now note that this is not the same thing as deleting the OTL file on disk. So if I bring up Windows Explorer over here, you can see that my control matrix VO2 OTL still exists on disk. So it didn't go anywhere, it just isn't in the HIP file anymore. So just close that. So what if we deleted it in error, or we deleted it a long time ago, and now we need to get it back? So how do we get it back? Well, what we can do is we go to File, and we say Install Digital Asset Library. That asks us to find it, so I already have it here. So we can find it. And then if we hit accept, now it's back. And now if we go back to the network editor, we can just take a look at control matrix. There's control matrix v02. Okay, so let's take a look at what happens if we try to delete this while we have an instance of the node in our scene. So if we grab that, we right click and we say uninstall. It comes up with the same question, we say okay, and this time I get a little error. And it's saying unable to find dialog script for control matrix v02 at oplib sop control matrix v02. So basically it's just saying it's really confused because there's an instance of the OTL and then you're trying to delete the definition of that OTL, or at least remove it from the HIP file. And so it doesn't know what to do. So what it does in that case is it puts it in this special library down here. And notice this is still part of the current HIP file section. And if I expand this library, this is the embedded library. Now we can see where that is. And if we middle mouse and hold on our control matrix v02 OTL, you can see that where it says defined by here, it says embedded instead of a path on disk. And it even gives us a warning saying it's using an incomplete asset definition. So essentially it's just kind of freaking out because of that. And the only way that we can really get rid of this embedded library at this point, you'll notice that if I hit delete and then hit OK, now it just brings up this error again and it's still embedded. So the only way to actually get rid of this at this point is still to delete this instance and then delete the embedded library. Basically what the embedded library is it's OTLs that are saved into the HIP file itself. So essentially your OTL definition is going to travel with your HIP file. Now this might sound like a really cool thing, but it's actually kind of dangerous because what it means is that your OTL definition only lives for that HIP file. You have no way of actually putting the OTL into another HIP file. Any changes that you make in this HIP file aren't going to affect other HIP files, which kind of defeats the purpose of OTLs. For certain purposes though, that might be exactly what you want. So just keep the embedded library in mind. So if you want to create an OTL in the embedded library, let's just take a look at that real fast. So let's scroll over this way a little bit. I'll just make a temporary empty OTL. So if I make a subnet, we can call this test. I'm not going to bother putting anything inside it because we're just going to delete it later. So if we right click on test and we say create digital asset, saying raw b test, I don't want that, so get rid of that. Now we're ready to embed the OTL in our HIP file. So normally with the save to library field, we would click this button and go find a place on disk for our OTL to live in. But instead of doing that, I'm just going to double click in here, and we're going to type embedded with a capital E. And notice that I'm typing this, and it looks exactly the same as it does up here. And if you call it anything else, Houdini will get confused, so you have to call it embedded. If we hit accept now, just hit accept on the edit operator type properties. Now you'll notice that SOP test is in this embedded library, so that means that it's part of the HIP file. Now at this point we probably want to go ahead and get rid of this test OTL because it was really only made for demonstration purposes. So let's just select it here and hit delete. Oh, first we need to actually delete it from the HIP file. So delete the instance there from the network editor, and now select it and hit delete. And there it goes. So let's take a look at how to delete our OTLs off of disk. So the way that OTL files work in Houdini is each OTL file is literally a library, and by that I mean that each OTL file can contain multiple operator definitions in it. Now for the purposes of this course, we're only going to be putting one definition in each OTL file because I think it's less confusing that way. And in fact, most of what I've seen professionally, that's the way that people do it. But just be aware that you can put multiple definitions in each OTL file. So if there were multiple definitions in this OTL file, if we expanded this, we would see multiple definitions in here. So these are all the definitions contained by the file at this path. So if I want, I can just delete them from that file. So let's go ahead and copy control matrix VO2 here. And then I'm just going to grab this, say control C, bring up the file browser, go back to my OTLs directory, paste .otl, and it's actually still there from last time. Hit accept, and then hit OK. So now it's up here and down here. And if I expand that, you can see that there's another definition here. Now you'll notice that now this one's colored red, and that's because there's two control matrix VO2s in HIP file. So it's coloring it red to tell us that it's not actually using that definition anymore. So notice that even though we have our instance here, I can middle click on it. You can see that it's coming from my path on disk. So I can just go ahead and delete that guy. I'm just going to select it and hit the delete key. And he's gone and Houdini doesn't complain. Okay, so if I want to delete this definition from this OTL file, all I have to do is select here and hit the delete key. And actually, I need to hit cancel here. We need to delete this instance or else Houdini is going to complain and just drop it back into the embedded library. So let's do that first. Delete the instance of the OTL from the network editor. And now come back to the operator type manager and delete it. And now it's saying, are you sure you want to permanently delete the operator from this OTL file? So basically what this is going to do is it's going to delete this operator from this OTL file, and since it's the only operator in the OTL file, this OTL file is actually going to be empty. So if I hit OK, you can see that it's actually gone now. And that's because there's nothing left in that OTL file, so Houdini just uninstalled it. In fact, if we go to File, Install Digital Asset Library, go to the file picker, and grab this. Notice that this thing's only 49 bytes now instead of the 5 or 6K that it was before. If we try to install it now, it actually comes up with an error because the OTL file is empty. So how do we go about adding our operator back into that OTL file? Well, if we go back to the operator type manager, And we go to find our control matrix node, which is right here. We can just copy it again. Call it underscore vo2 underscore. I'm just going to control C for later. vo2. And then if we go back to the file browser, we can just select this, and Houdini will automatically add it in there. So if we hit accept, and then hit accept again, now it's there, and notice that it's getting it from there. So if we wanted, we could even copy it again, make it v03, but install it to the same path on disk, which is still this control matrix vo2.otl. Hit accept, and now notice that there are two definitions coming from this OTL file. Now, like I said, I think it's a lot less confusing to only have one definition in each OTL file. So we're not going to be working this way for the rest of the course, but just so that you guys know that you can work this way.